So hands up if you've taken a business ethics course or a marketing ethics course. Hands up if you've taken a moral psychology course. It's about the empirical evidence about how people think about right and wrong. Okay, so that's pretty rare in marketing, advertising, and branding. I'll talk today about virtue signaling and how it relates to marketing and branding. Virtue signaling is a term that's kind of flooded into the news the last year or two, and it seems to be everywhere. A lot of people are very confused about what it is, why it means, why it matters, but it's basically showing off the traits and values that are considered morally good by others, and it's often showing them off in a way that gains you as the signaler, as the displayer, some kind of social, sexual, or status benefit. So examples would be the Facebook political rants that you all have been subject to from your friends and family the last 2 or 3 weeks, whatever direction they're going. A lot of people are showing off, these are my values. Oh my God, other people don't share them. Or consumer purchases, a lot of goods and services are bought not just to make the purchaser happy, but to show I'm a certain kind of person with certain kinds of values. That's virtue signaling. Or corporate vision and mission statements that say, this is the kind of company we are ethically. That's virtue signaling. So as an example, the guy in the middle there might make a proclamation to his adoring worshipers. I buy Grounds for Change coffee, meaning coffee that is fair trade, organic, shade-grown, carbon-free, right, that's good for the coffee bean pickers and good for polar bears and whoever. And in response, hopefully, from his point of view, their response will be my hero, right? I like guys who do that. I appreciate their ethics. That's important. And we know that ethical virtues are important in mate choice. But there's one holdout in the lower right, this woman who says, but, are you just showing off personality traits considered virtuous to gain social, sexual, or status benefits without delivering any real benefits to others? All right. And so virtue signaling is often thrown around as a sort of term of insult by people like that to kind of dismiss the arguments that people are making. And we see this all the time on social media, where one person, like Jane here, will say, oh, wow, I hate Fox News. They're so evil and they hate women. Maybe she tweets that. And then John, one of her followers, says, why don't you actually do something instead of just virtue signaling about it? Right? And then she goes, oh my God, that'd be way too much work. I'll go back to shit posting on Twitter. So virtue signaling can be a dismissive insult, as it's often been used, like by the alt-right against liberals in the last few months. But in my view, it can also be a neutral, useful scientific description of something that we all do naturally, instinctively, to some degree. Virtue signaling might be unreliable, a form of cheap talk, as economists call it, or it might be reliable and hard to fake, a true, honest signal of your innermost values that are being expressed accurately. And sometimes it might substitute for action. You might do virtue signaling like Facebook moralizing instead of actually going to vote, or actually purchasing a product or donating to a charity. But it can also deliver real benefits when it's channeled in the right ways, like in the effective altruism movement that I'll mention in a little bit. So you can also do virtue signaling at a kind of meta level where you're aware of it, but it doesn't keep you from doing it. In fact, you can do it better if you're more aware of exactly how it works, what traits you're displaying, and what the real benefits of doing it are. So if this woman says, I harness self-consciously, maybe because I went and studied evolutionary psychology, right? I harness my virtue signaling instincts to make consumer purchases that, yes, maximize my subjective well-being, but also minimizing avoidable suffering for all sentient beings, other people, and perhaps animals or the ecosystem. And hopefully the response will be, let's make babies. Right? I want those virtue genes to be mixed with mine in the next generation. So the deeper question is, human moral instincts, we all have very strong intuitions about what's ethical and what's not ethical. Are those really strategies for doing good, to deliver benefits to others? In some cases, yes. We have kin-directed altruism to help other relatives who carry copies of our genes. We have reciprocity instincts to trade effectively benefits with others. I scratch my back, you'll scratch my back. We have in-group ethical intuitions about how to help my group compete better against other groups. But why would we ever care about strangers? Why would we ever donate to charity to help people we've never met? Those are the issues where we don't seem to have very good instincts for spontaneously caring about that. And that's why it's taken ages to invent things like GiveWell, which does serious quantitative analyses of which charities actually save the most lives per dollar. Or the effective altruism movement, which is a lot of very rationalistic millennials who figured out, hey, we should spend our lives doing things that do the most good for others, but how do we know? Let's be skeptical about what really works. Or Giving What We Can, where people make a pledge to give 10% of their income to truly effective charities. Most of us are not involved in these movements, and they don't seem intuitively that appealing, and it takes some work to get people to appreciate their benefits. Most of us instead are happy to wear t-shirts that say, I volunteered at such and such an event, or I did a 10K run for charity, or whatever, or you go to charity auctions that blow millions of dollars in order to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. For us as consumer researchers, the key question is, when consumers make purchases, are they really maximizing expected subjective utility for themselves, doing things that will deliver benefits to them? Or are they sometimes, or often, simply acquiring goods and services to appear virtuous to others? And the dilemma here is, for example, if you do CrossFit, but you're also vegan, what do you mention first when you walk into a room? Because typically, if you're CrossFit, that comes up within about the first 12 seconds. I think vegan, that's the first 8 seconds. So I've thought about these issues for 25 years. In my book, The Mating Mind, in 2000, I analyzed sexual selection, where we choose mates for certain traits that include things like intelligence, creativity, art, music, sense of humor, and moral virtues. In mating intelligence, I focus specifically on how we advertise general and social and emotional intelligence to others during courtship. In Spent, I analyzed how we broadcast our intelligence and the big 5 personality traits through the goods and services that we buy. And most recently, my advice book to young men who are very confused about women, called What Women Want, takes evolutionary psychology, including evolutionary moral psychology, and says, among other things that women want is a kind and virtuous man who's got a kind of moral compass. So consumers signal their virtues, and they signal them to various constituencies: friends, potential mates, lovers, potential spouses, sexual rivals, economic rivals, their own kin and relatives, their co-workers, and their neighbors. And sometimes, to the extent that these different folks have conflicting moral values, you get quite confused about what should I be signaling to different constituencies, to different social markets I've got. And consumers signal their virtues through goods and services of all sorts: where you go on holiday, what kind of toothpaste you use, what kind of clothes you wear, what food you buy. And they do it not just through buying, but also how they use it. Is your t-shirt displayed outside out or inside out, as with the Dan Ariely example? They display these services not just in real life, but on social media. They discuss them in real life and on social media. They review them on Amazon or Yelp or Airbnb. But most consumer research so far does not systematically analyze people's deep moral traits and values that they care about, or their virtue signaling strategies and how exactly they display these things. So for example, does it really work, if you're an environmentalist, to get a bag that literally says, my reusable bag makes me better than you? If that doesn't work, why doesn't it? Right? Because basically that's what reusable bags are saying. It probably doesn't make a blind bit of difference to the environment overall, who's using this. But people think it matters. Does it really make a difference whether you buy Good Virtues Company brightening facial cleanser or some other product? Well, maybe it does if somebody sees this in your bathroom the morning after. Who knows? But Apple has managed to build over $100 billion in brand equity largely as a virtue signal. Right? If you've got that Apple logo on your product, that basically says, I'm an open-minded, cosmopolitan, multicultural, future-oriented person. right, with a certain set of values, and I'm willing to pay a price premium to broadcast those values. Also, companies do virtue signaling. So what is your company broadcasting about its moral values, right? And again, there are different constituencies. So you're broadcasting to consumers to try to convince them to buy or to rebuy or get the service contract or whatever. You're also broadcasting, though, to the people who work for you, right? How are you going to recruit good workers? What do they think your virtues are? You're advertising to your investors, particularly if they're doing ethical investing or impact investing, right? Are they going to choose your company as ethical? You're broadcasting to your rivals certain virtues, which might be you're incredibly aggressive and you will crush them, or it might be we're willing to enter into a co-branding arrangement. You're broadcasting to your suppliers and to retailers who are going to make judgments about do they want to do business with you or not. And often a key thing is broadcasting your virtues to government regulators. I mean, everybody in this room wants to be a monopolist or an oligopolist. It's just a question of, are we a benign oligopolist in the views of regulators or an evil oligopolist? That'll influence the regulatory environment you face. And how do you broadcast your virtues as a company? Through the company name itself, like good virtues, right? Or a slogan like Google's "Don't be evil," right? That's a fairly strong ethical statement. They're not saying Google, the best data refinery on the planet, Google because AdWords really works. It's saying don't be evil. They know they're powerful. The question is, what are the ethics? Through the company mission vision statements, through policies, publicity, advertising, promotions, product design, and product features, these are all occasions for displaying virtue. What virtues are you displaying, and are you consciously building virtue signaling into all of those elements of your company strategy or not? Now, things like company vision statements are very easy to satirize, right? Because people have a kind of good bullshit detector about virtues that are hypocritical. So companies can actually sometimes do well. This is not a real Taco Bell slogan, but Taco Bell, we're open and you're stoned. Or Kmart, we still exist. But again, most companies do not systematically analyze and optimize their virtue signaling strategies. So let's take a step back and ask what personal traits, particularly for consumers, does virtue signaling really signal? What are we really trying to show off? If you're this species of bird, this male bird is showing off basically good genes, good health, good reproductive potential. That has been analyzed by biologists. That's what females want. That's why they choose him as a mate. But with virtue signaling, are we showing off good genes or good health or good mental health or what? Well, one good place to start would be NYU professor Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory. I highly recommend his book, The Righteous Mind. If more people in different political parties had read that, if voters had read that, this election would have been much more interesting and dynamic and intelligent. We would have been not talking past each other quite so much. Haidt has empirically shown that there are 6 key moral values that people across different societies seem to care about. Those values are care, reducing harm and promoting well-being, the basic utilitarian ethos; justice, fairness, proportionality; the value of liberty, freedom, sovereignty, autonomy, privacy; loyalty, meaning solidarity, respect for your local community or nationalism; sanctity is about purity and holiness and not being sexually and morally disgusting to others; and finally, authority is respect for dominance, power, and traditions. And some of those you think, great. Some of those you might think, that's not even a virtue. And here's the problem. Haidt has found liberals prioritize the first 2 of these, care and justice, over all the others. Not everybody, but typically that's what happens. Whereas conservatives also value these other 4, liberty, loyalty, sanctity, and authority. And a lot of the talking past each other comes from having different weights on different of these moral values. And the problem comes if you're a Clinton speechwriter, right, and you only talk about care and justice, and your undecided voters also care about these things, you're not going to be hitting them with all the hot buttons that they really care about virtue signaling. But I think even deeper than Haidt's moral foundations are the big 5 personality traits. Hands up if you use Myers-Briggs personality stuff. Hands up if you actually measure big 5 traits in your business. Nobody measures big 5. Myers-Briggs is literally 60 years out of date. Nobody should be doing it at all. The American corporate obsession, the fetishization of Myers-Briggs beggars belief. If you talk to any serious personality psychologist, they'll go, why are you guys still doing that? The big 5 personality traits are way better. They're stable across life and across situations. They're reliably measurable. They're valid across cultures and situations. They're genetically heritable. They predict behavior across not just humans, but across all the other great apes. They've been measured, and they work in orangutans, gorillas, bonobos, and chimps. And they're really powerful. You might as well measure them. They're easily measured. They are openness, meaning open-mindedness, curiosity, and tolerance. Conscientiousness, which is self-control, willpower, and reliability. Agreeableness is warmth, kindness, and trust. Extroversion is leadership, ambition, and courage. And emotional stability is stoicism, resilience, and calmness. The opposite of that is neuroticism, or being worried and anxious all the time. Each of these, crucially, has a moral dimension. These are morally valenced. Some people think being high on one of these is good. Others think being low on one of these is good. Personality psychologists have done us a huge disservice in trying to separate the morality out of personality. But you guys are allowed to use personality measures however you want, including analyzing virtue signaling. So, for example, let's take just two of these traits. Openness. Low openness is associated with being conservative, showing a lot of in-group loyalty like nationalism, being relatively pro-censorship under most conditions, being sexually fairly mainstream and traditional, sex negative, like being into vanilla monogamy, and having a high degree of sexual and moral disgust towards anything that falls outside your social norms. And low openness brands that are actually attractive to people with those traits include, of course, Trump as a brand, Hobby Lobby, Chick-fil-A, the kinds of companies that often get picketed and boycotted by liberals. Coca-Cola, for some reason, historically has been more associated with conservative ideology. So some of these associations are quite arbitrary. Mary Kay Cosmetics also tends to be on the conservative side of the spectrum. The high openness values are probably values that most New Yorkers in marketing think are obviously the morally correct values. Right? Liberal values, multiculturalism, globalism, free speech, unless it's speech that's against liberals, being kinky or polyamorous, or having low disgust. So the high openness brands would be things like Gary Johnson libertarianism, Apple Computer, as I mentioned, Starbucks with their ill-fated Race Together initiative, Pepsi, United Colors of Benetton, which is explicitly a multicultural brand. This is fine. If you want to attract those folks, it's going to be a massive turnoff to those folks. And Google itself has really doubled down on its liberal values recently. Agreeableness is a little trickier because people really differ on what they think the optimal degree of agreeableness is. Low agreeableness means tough-minded, protective, masculine, and self-oriented. This is the trait on which there's the biggest sex difference. Men on average are quite a bit less agreeable than women. High agreeableness means tenderheartedness, warm-heartedness, nurturing, feminine, and other-oriented. So a typical low agreeableness brand would be Ford Built Tough, Beef, it's what's for dinner, goddammit. Heckler and Koch, no compromise on the submachine guns. Certain musical genres like death metal, here satirized with the Rainbow Unicorn. And even some cosmetics brands are relatively low openness, low agreeableness compared to other cosmetics brands, like L'Oreal, because you're worth it. That's a kind of self-esteem pitch. The high agreeableness brands or certifications would be like vegan certified, because you care about animals. The Subaru marketing campaign that's been very welcoming to lesbians and LGBT consumers. Cruelty-free cosmetics. The Clinton motto, I believe in love and kindness. Again, that'll be obviously attractive to anybody who's high agreeableness, but it'll be hugely, like the H and K aficionados aren't going to like that, right? Because it sounds weak and wimpy and unprotective to them. And then certain musical stars like Miley Cyrus with her animal welfare support would be high agreeableness. Okay, so last two slides. Things to note, takeaways. Does your brand strategy explicitly include a virtue signaling strategy? Does your marketing team include truly diverse political, religious, and moral attitudes on top of racial and sexual diversity? If you don't, you got a problem. Hands up if you would identify as liberal. Hands up if you would say you're middle of the road. Hands up if you're conservative. Okay, there's a huge bias in this room towards liberal. There's typically a huge bias in marketing teams towards liberal. And that's a problem because most products have a kind of political and ethical side to them. And if you don't understand, if there's a mismatch between the distribution of like moral foundations in your marketing team versus those of your consumers, you're going to miss a lot of the virtue signaling that you could understand. Have a look at the Heterodox Academy, which is a way of trying to fix this problem. In academia, there's lessons you could apply in marketing. Second, if you're using big data to do market segmentation, are you analyzing and interpreting your big data results in terms of just demographics and preferences or in terms of morals and virtues that are being signaled? Think about virtue clusters, not just preference clusters. And finally, are your company values, brand virtues, and product virtues all aligned? Because customers will relentlessly punish inconsistencies, equivocations, and hypocrisies. Last slide. I think we can harness our virtue signaling instincts to do well with our companies, but also to do good for society and for the world. Virtue signaling has been a taboo topic until recently. Basically, liberals said, we're not going to accuse you, conservatives, of virtue signaling if you don't accuse us of virtue signaling. Right? The last year, that détente has collapsed. It has broken. Everybody is accusing everybody of virtue signaling, and they don't always know what they're talking about, so it's important to be empirically accurate. Virtue signaling runs deep in biology. We've probably been doing it for at least a couple 100,000 years. We could ignore it, fight it, or use it for better. And I think the better we understand it, the better we can design, market, and build communities around our products, and also the more good we can do in the world. Thank you.